1. I lived in Menifee, California for about over 3 years. During that time, I went to the local high school, and let me just say that a lot of crazy stuff went down while I attended. One time, a library employee showed up to the school very early in the morning and shot herself in her car. The body was discovered during second period. What creeps me out most of all was that I passed by her car while walking to school that morning and didn't even notice it. Another time, an undercover cop posing as a student was able to identify kids that were selling narcotics, and a huge drug bust ensued shortly after. Strangely enough, on the same day that happened, while I was walking to school, some guy I knew asked if I wanted to buy pot off him, which I wisely declined. Later on, I saw that same guy get arrested and escorted out of my classroom. The event itself closely mirrored the film 21 Jump Street. Pretty awesome. However, the one event that was probably the biggest shock the entire community was the disappearance and death of a local boy named Terry Dwayne Smith Jr. The tragedy happened during the summer after the 2013 school year. I don't know who the boy was, but I did know his older brother, Skylar. I knew Skylar from school. He was in my first period English class at the time. I didn't talk to him much, even though he sat near me, but on the times that I did say a word to him, he was friendly. He came off as a little odd, but I personally didn't think he was really that strange. He had his own group of friends that were all easy to get along with. Something of note that did happen early on in the school year was a confrontation he got in with another student. I remember hearing about how this one guy said something offensive to Skylar, which greatly angered him and erupted into a fight. The kid's front tooth got knocked out. At the time, it seemed funny to everyone else, but it was an indicator of how far he'd be willing to go when it came to getting agitated. Anyways, on to the main story. After school ended that year, I spent most of the summer just hanging out with my trio of friends. One day I was in my room doing nothing of interest, so I decided to go on Facebook. While on there, Skylar posted something that appeared on my newsfeed. He said his little brother had gone missing and was urging his friends to be on the lookout for his whereabouts. I found it pretty unfortunate, but thought the kid probably would be found the same day. Either the same day or the next, I forgot which. I happened to be watching the news and the number one topic was the disappearance of a boy named Terry. A picture of him was then put up. On closer examination, I noticed he was the same boy that Skylar had posted about earlier. Apparently the situation had gotten dire, and the brother's mother, Shauna, had called for a group effort to go in search for the boy. As the days went on, more and more people went out in search of young Terry. I believe Skylar made a few more posts about it, but I could be wrong. Eventually, he was made a suspect and taken into custody by the police, because he was the last person to see Terry alive before he went missing. I remember hearing about how a lot of his friends were in denial and disbelief. To them, he could never do such a thing. Since I personally didn't know Skylar that well, I couldn't really pass judgment at the time. While in custody, Skylar changed his story several times about his last encounter with his brother. His main one being that they were home alone and he decided to leave and go hang out with his friends, and that supposedly Teddy followed him for a while until Skylar told him he couldn't tag along and ordered him to return home. This set up his theory that Terry was probably abducted by someone that night. Finally, after several days of searching, Terry's body was eventually discovered behind the family home under a tree in a shallow grave. The general consensus at the time was that Skylar did kill him for unknown reasons and tried to bury him. Some even thought that the mother was in on it because she was still in defense of Skylar, who was then charged with the crime. Shauna acted pretty strangely, such as saying Terry had autism and that supposedly at first she didn't let the cops investigate her properly. After the corpse was discovered, the huge search party was promptly called off, and a candlelight vigil was held for Terry. In the aftermath, a lot of drama ensued. Terry's father came into town from the other side of the country and claimed that his ex-wife had lied about their son having autism, and demanded to take his body back with him to be buried in his local area. He even sued Shauna for a large amount of money. I think it was for child negligence or for emotional distress. The two even appeared and debated on the Dr. Phil show, but nothing came out of that besides what everyone already knew. Since at the time Skylar was a minor, he wasn't charged as an adult. He was found guilty of manslaughter but was offered a plea deal, the details of which have not been released to the public. Apparently, what actually happened was that the brothers were roughhousing when Terry accidentally got killed. Their mother later suggested something like the boy hitting his head on the corner of a table or something. In a panic, Skylar tried to bury him in the backyard. What was strange was that knowing what had happened, Skylar still went to Facebook and asked for help in searching for his brother, instead of just confessing. Skylar was sentenced to 12 years and will stay in juvenile detention until he's 23. 2. When I was growing up, I would always have friends come over, and we would play outside in my front yard. Cars would only drive by maybe once an hour, so a lot of the time we would play in the street. I lived in a pretty nice neighborhood. It was quiet and consisted of 90% old people, so my mom was never worried about us being outside alone. But that eventually changed. It all started when I was 10. I had invited a few of my friends over to hang out. They were all in sports, so they decided they were going to kick a soccer ball around in the street, while I probably played with my cat. I was bored, so I started looking around, and I noticed my neighbor, I'll refer to him as CS, across the street, was outside sitting in his garage. This was normal to me though, because ever since I was little, he would sit out there in front of a small TV for most of the day. This time was different though. I started looking closer and realized that CS had binoculars up to his face. Strange, I thought. The only thing in front of his garage he could see is my house. No birds or animals that were interesting enough to watch. I turned to my friends and pointed it out, and they agreed that it was strange. But we shrugged it off and continued to play. A while later, I glanced into CS's garage again. This time he had a camera, pointing at me. I started to freak out. He then noticed all of us talking about him and went inside. A few minutes later, we see that his front door is open, and someone has a camera held up to the glass. We continue playing in the road, freaking out a bit. But we didn't care to go inside. Eventually he comes back outside, but this time he comes out of the garage. He grabs a small bench from his porch and starts walking towards us. He sets down the bench at the edge of his yard, a few feet away from us. Out of curiosity of what he was going to do next, we continued chatting and playing. Why we didn't run away? I don't know. He starts mumbling things and my friends ignore him, but I can't help but listen closely. He starts saying things about our appearance. Through his mumbles I hear, "So beautiful. Gorgeous." But then I clearly hear him say, "I want to lick your pussy." I was young, but I knew what that meant, and I was done being near that man. So I went inside and told my mom. She was obviously shocked and disgusted, and we went to do something about it. Coincidentally, the guy living right next to the creep is a cop, so she goes out there and tells him the story. The cops show up to CS's house and talk to him and the lady that lives with him. The cops couldn't really do anything because they had no proof he actually did these things. The lady living at the house claims that he's a friend, and she's letting him live with her. Also that she had no idea he was like this, and was going to tell him to leave. We also find out that his name is Steve, hence the name Creepy Steve. So CS leaves that night. My family is relieved for a few days, but then he comes back. My mom was hesitant in letting me go outside after that. She would watch me and my friends through the window every time we were out there playing. He didn't do anything else for a while. One day, a few months later, my friends and I were laying in my front yard, talking and looking at the stars. Then CS's window opens. He's naked. He stands there for a minute as we freak out, because our innocent eyes have never seen anything like that before. Then closes the window. I didn't tell my mom about that incident. CS didn't do anything after that until about 7 years later. In July of last year, my friend and I arrived to my house around 10 p.m. after going on one of our summer driving adventures. She planned on staying the night, so she parked at the bottom of my yard. We sat in her car talking and laughing pretty loudly about our lives, friend drama, etc., with the windows down. What we didn't know is that CS had his windows open and could hear us. CS just recently started a thing where he liked to blast music so loud that the entire neighborhood could hear it. It was pretty annoying when you could hear music all the way inside your bedroom at night. But no one ever complained. Anyway, we started to hear music blaring from his house. I remember thinking, what the hell does he listen to? This sounds like cheesy porno music. My friend is dying because of how strange this music is. Then I start to hear moaning. Yep, I was right. It starts quiet, and you really had to listen to hear it, but he turned it up. Now porn is playing loud enough for every surrounding house to hear. My friend and I are crying laughing, but at the same time we're terrified, because we knew that he heard us. So now we're sitting in the car hearing, "Yes, Daddy," and excessive gagging noises as we sit there in silence, trying to comprehend what the fuck was going on. I start filming it, and sending it to all my friends because this shit is pretty funny. But then it stops. After this, we see a figure walk across the room in front of the glass door. He's naked again, and he knows we can see him. He stands there for God knows how long. We're freaking out, and don't know what to do, so I text my dad to come outside and save us. No response. Eventually, I have her drive me up to my garage to let me inside, and she speeds off. I tried to tell my parents again, but they didn't care, since nothing was fixed last time. So later that night, at around 2 a.m., my friend, who moved to another state, decided to show up at my house. I sat outside and told him about the whole thing. At the time, his friend was in the back seat of his car eating Wendy's. Then at 2 a.m., CS and his lady friend leave out the front door to walk their dog around the neighborhood. They leave their front door open and unlocked. So the Wendy's kid decided to run up, open the door, and throw his fries all over their living room. Not exactly the revenge I wanted on CS, but it was pretty funny. Shortly after that, we moved away, and I haven't seen him since. So yeah, Creepy Steve. Let's not meet. 3. So this story took place in 2010, when I was about 17 years old. But I'll give some background information. I grew up in a typical safe suburban neighborhood, where neighbors were neighborly, Girl Scouts would walk door to door, selling cookies and such. We lived in a few houses down from a park, in a small court. People would walk their dogs by our house typically to get to the park. One middle-aged couple, who lived very close to us, on the cross street of my court, had 2 golden retrievers that the husband Greg and or his wife Mary would walk to the park every morning and every night. They lived alone, no children in the house. They were somewhat friendly with my parents, enough to say hi and small talk on occasion, nothing more. When I was about 12, they asked my parents if I was interested in dog sitting for them whenever they were out of town. They agreed, and I did about twice a year until I was 17. Greg and Mary were odd people. Nothing that I could pinpoint, just off. Eccentric, I guess. Their house was the exact same model as mine. but I always felt uncomfortable whenever I was there. I always had a strange, creeped-out gut feeling being there. I have joked that the place was haunted. I would make these little remarks to my mom, in the way a whiny teen would. Fast forward to 2010. I would bring my boyfriend at the time with me to go feed the dogs. Whenever we went to see Greg and Mary to return their keys, or something, they would engage us in non-stop weird conversations, asking about our relationship, telling us to use their jacuzzi whenever we wanted. I was starting to get tired of dealing with them, and no longer wanted to help them out, but I didn't know how, or have the confidence, to tell them this. This was the last time I ever dog sat for them. They had left that morning, and it was the first night they were gone on vacation. My ex-boyfriend and I went to the house to feed and walk the dogs. As usual, it was creeping me out just being there. On a set of cubbies in their living room, where they stored the dog leashes, was a baseball hat. The hat was child-sized, about the size for a 7-year-old. The hat was upside down, very conspicuously placed out in the open. My stomach dropped when I saw that, in large letters written on the side of the hat, was my brother's full name. It was written in my mother's very distinct handwriting. I instantly was nauseous and horrified. I felt sick, and that I needed to get out of the house immediately. I was filled with questions. Why do they have my brother's childhood baseball hat? Why is it upside down where they leave the dog leashes for us? I tried to stay calm, and we took a few pictures with my phone and we sprinted home. I immediately told my parents, who went back with me to the house. My mom confirmed that it was her handwriting and my brother's old hat. They were furious and confused, as was I. They told me to leave the hat as it was so they could think of how to best approach the situation. This incident felt pretty much like a confirmation of my gut feeling that I had about them for years. I also called my brother, who lived out of state, that night. He was angry, confused, and scared, and an array of different emotions. He remembered the hat, but had not a single clue as to why they would have it, or seemingly leave it there on purpose for me to see. I never entered that house or spoke to them again. My parents handled the situation from then on. My mom questioned my brother, asking him if they ever touched him, or did any wrong to him. My brother said no, but that there was just something not right about them. My parents waited until the night Greg and Mary were home, and waited till around 5 p.m. when Greg would take the dogs to the park, passing our house. My father, rather abruptly, chased him down with my mom and questioned him. The first thing he asked was for my brother's hat back. Greg played dumb. He had no idea what my dad was talking about. My mom showed Greg the picture on her phone. Greg's response was, "Oh, I found that hat in the park and forgot to return it." My dad called him on his bullshit. Now, I don't know word for word what else my father said, although he told me he threatened him with involving the police and to never speak to our family again, but demanded to have the hat back. My parents seemed not to want to tell me much more about the confrontation. Then, the next morning, my mom found the hat on our doorstep. Not much else came from this, and so many questions I had were unanswered. After all of this, I was terrified for a long time. I hated to be in my house alone until the day I moved out. I slept with pepper spray beside my bed. Had some nightmares as well. I was afraid they'd retaliate. My family still has no idea how or why they had the hat for about 18 years, or why they left for me to find, especially where they knew I'd see it. I no longer live with my parents, but Greg and Mary still live there. Since the incident, they have never spoken to any of my family again. They no longer walk their dogs by my parents' house. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 184. Thank you very much to everyone who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Happy to say I'm finally caught up on my Let's Not Meet messages. A few weeks had gone by there, I hadn't sent any out. Did so yesterday, and very pleasantly, I ended up with, about 20 new stories waiting for me today. People had been very kind to give the permission. So I'll add those to the ones I already had, and that'll keep me going for a little while with fresh stories. Now, Greg and Mary. At first, as I was reading that story, I thought, well, perhaps Greg and Mary are swingers and they want to bang a couple of teenagers, which is creepy in and of itself, but somehow the hat thing's just even weirder. Strange stuff indeed. Okay, and with that, I think I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.